Doamnelor, domnilor și onorată instanță, mă înfățișez în fața dumneavoastră cu o întrebare sinceră. Când piratatul nu este furat? Pentru că avem exemple când pur și simplu nu poți cumpăra un anumit produs de nicăieri încât să aducă bani proprietarului IP-ului. Din ce am înțeles, versiunea digitală Wolverine Origins s-a evaporat de ani de zile și singurele soluții sunt ori să vânezi o copie fizică second hand, ori să piratezi jocul. Dacă îl cumperi SH, banii ăia tot nu ajung la proprietarul original, deci fie că îl piratezi sau nu, e cam același lucru pentru oamenii care l-au creat. La fel am înțeles că s-a întâmplat și cu licența pentru jocul Deadpool. Dacă vreți să ne complicăm și mai tare, ar mai fi The Darkness, disponibil doar pe Xbox 360 și PS3. Pe când aveam Xbox Seria X, am reușit să-l cumpăr la ofertă de pe store-ul Microsoft și să-l joc prin backwards compatibility. Dar și aici vorbim de un caz excepțional, pentru că Xbox a trebuit să-l facă să ruleze întâi pe Seria X de pe Xbox 360. Deci iar nu-i clară situația. Ce să mai zic de jocul The Crew din 2014, care a fost distrus de Ubisoft, dar ulterior readus la viață de comunitatea sa loială. Din cât mă duce capul, treaba pare oarecum în regulă cu piratatul jocurilor care au licențe expirate de care faci rost ori extrem de greu și ai nevoie de nu știu ce hardware oficial, ca o consolă, ori e chiar imposibil să dai de ele. Asta mă aduce la exemplul de astăzi, doamnelor și domnilor, Bloodborne emulat pe PC. Și întrebarea mea pentru voi este, dacă deja l-am cumpărat, cred că de vreo 3 ori, poate 4 până acum de-a lungul istoriei, le mai fac vreun rău lui Sony și FromSoft că îl trag de pe Filelist ca să-l joc la potențialul său maxim din 2026, luând în considerare că proprietarii, aparent, au hotărât să-l abandoneze și să-i lase cadavrul în putrefacție la lada de gunoi a istoriei? Am să vă invit să vă lăsați dumneavoastră opinia în comentarii. Între timp, hai să ne uităm la ce a prezentat Digital Foundry despre toată treaba asta. Ca de fiecare dată, regulile sunt simple, când am nevoie să vorbesc, voi pune pauză și voi întrerupe emisiunea acum. Ședeți cu minți căci durează ceva, anume peste 20 de minute.
Within a span of just 1 year since we last looked at it, the state of PlayStation 4 emulation on PC has improved drastically, and it's truly worth revisiting in 2026. Simply put, the emulator of choice, Shad's PS4, is not only in a stable state while playing titles like Bloodborne, but in many ways the experience is now superior to the 2015 PS4 original. And Bloodborne is of course a unique case within the PS4's catalogue. It's gone entirely untouched by Sony or From Software since launch, and to this day, the game runs at just 1080p and at an unevenly frame-paced 30fps cap, even if played via back and pat on PS5. For such a venerated title, it's surprising to see it ignored for so long in terms of even a basic 60fps patch on PS5, or more optimistically, a remaster. The upside being that the absence of any official work on the game since launch has galvanized the emulation community on PC, and while there are still rough edges in its emulation, the results today are extraordinary. So let's cut to the chase. Everything you see here is Bloodborne running via...
Mamă, deci mă uit la norii aia din spate și la cărămizile astea aici, la texturi, arată absolut formidabil. Formidabil arată. Pentru un joc din 2015, da? Care evident e lucrat de prin 2013, cât am mai lucrat la el atunci.
A Shad PS4 on an i9-13900K FPS.
Ăla e procesorul meu, numai că eu am K cu placă integrată, n-am F.
Equipped with an Nvidia RTX 4080
Holy shit, asta e rigul meu și eu am 4080.
GPU and 32GB of RAM.
Am
It's running at 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, and with boosted geometry level of detail settings. All of these extras are achievable.
Ok, vreau să mă uit aici. Deci are uncapped FPS. Oh my fucking god. Oh my god, și are doar 29 de giga. God damn. Deci dacă e simplu de pus în funcțiune, fără să-mi ia 14.000 de .ini files, operațiuni din astea de făcut,
within the Shad PS4 emulator alone via checkboxes in a patch menu, but as the cherry on the cake, it's also possible to run mods over the top. This one in particular is a must. Created by modder FromSoft, Shadows of the Hunt gives the deluxe experience by adding true dynamic shadow casting to the environment. It improves materials and textures, and using Reshade, it upgrades ambient occlusion shading, temporal anti-aliasing, and more. The idea then is to get as close as possible to what a theoretical official remaster might be, but even in assessing the classic Bloodborne experience with no mods, there's a lot to love here. So firstly, what does it take in terms of settings to get the vanilla game running on a desktop PC in a stable fashion? Is it now possible to get a locked 4K 60 FPS on an RTX 4080? On the opposite end of the power scale, is Shad PS4 now optimized enough for Bloodborne to run on a handheld like the ROG Xbox Ally X, where CPU and GPU resource is more confined? And finally, what are the visual benefits of mods like Shadows of the Hunt, and what's the performance cost?
Nu-mi place ăla Shadows of the Hunt. E prea închis și strică, vedeți, îi dă un filtru de Matrix de verde, îl mai închide la culoare, deși, ok, înțeleg că mai pune umbre pe aici în loc de asta, dar eu sunt prea nebunit după estetica sau designul original Bloodborne, altfel spus Vanilla Bloodborne, ca să-l modific. Și nu e vorba de purism sau chestii de genul. Dar nu-mi place verdele ăsta. What the fuck? Why? De ce e verde? Fuck that.
There. Let's find out.
E și mai închis. Like, uite cât de deschis e ăla din stânga. Țuț.
To start, it's worth stressing that Shad PS4 does still have lingering visual bugs and freezes, and this is obviously still work in progress. Even so, and after some painstaking trial and
Încă work in progress, oh my god!
error, I've managed to get settings into place for a kind of best case scenario for Bloodborne. I'm using the main branch of Shad PS4 taken directly from the official site, and after installing the launcher and directing it to your Bloodborne install, a few extra steps are needed. First, you'll need to download an executable
acum începe PC Master Race
via the version manager at the top right of Shad PS4. I've loaded pre-release nightly version 0.13.1, but version 0.13 is effectively the same. Crucially, these newer builds contain the shader caching option, which, as I'll get to, drastically improves hitching. Next, right-click on the Bloodborne tile and go to game-specific settings. For the smoothest VSync experience at 60 FPS, I'd strongly recommend going to the graphics tab and using the FIFO VSync method, rather than the other mailbox option, which seems to hitch and suffer more obvious lurches. Next along, I've selected async logging in the log section, and then you'll need to go to the experimental tab and hit the DevBox console checkbox, and the all-new shader cache option below that. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit, but if you want to run at resolutions like 1440p or 4K, you'll need to change those two parameters on the right. Bump the additional DRAM allocation to 6GB and boost the VBlank frequency to 9999 Hz. The reason being, by default, the emulator only simulates the amount of RAM available on an actual base PS4 system, around 8GB in theory, but since this isn't enough for 4K resolution, we need to allocate more to the task. The consequence of running at even 1440p without this RAM tweak is entertaining for all the wrong reasons. In short, you'll increase the likelihood of seeing vertex explosion bugs, where textures and geometry fail to load in, causing all manner of odd distortions to the world. In fact, cranking the game up to 4K, Central Yharnam turns into a kind of fever dream, so bumping the DRAM up is an essential tweak here. Thanks to Digital Foundry patron iExplosiveRage for these extra tips. If you find there are still issues with vertex explosions, I'd strongly recommend this mod from Nexus Mods. It's a small fix and disables face customization, but it should solve most, if not all, bugs in this vein. Just a few crucial steps left here. Right-click on the Bloodborne tile again, and this time go to Cheats and Patches. Optionally, you can elect to skip the intro, remove chromatic
Oh my god, poți să dai disable la chromatic aberration. Wow. Nu cream că am să văd vreodată Bloodborne fără. Ok.
aberration and motion blur.
Eu n-aș schimba astea. Aș lăsa estetica așa cum a văzut-o înalt preasfințitul Miyazaki. de regulă dau off la chromatic aberration, că chiar e o aberație. Dar în cazul ăsta e mai mult subtilă decât e evidentă, e Bloodborne, îl ador. Cred că e jocul meu preferat of all time. Îl joc cel puțin de 2 ori pe an, uneori de 3 ori. Urmează acum în martie, că împlinește 11 ani de când nu s-a atins Sony de el, dar hai să-i dăm.
More pertinent though to get in the game running well, you'll need the task split patch, increased graphics heap sizes, and the Intel 12 Plus SFX workaround patch, which I find helps avoid crashes. The highest LOD setting is a nice bonus of course, and doesn't affect performance or stability in my testing, so just use the maximum there. And of course, the 60 FPS patch speaks for itself. Further down, there are patches for resolutions besides Bloodborne's default 1080p. So 4K and 1440p are there as overrides, or you could go down to 560p if you're power limited. With all that in place, let's focus on the vanilla unmodded experience first. The fact of the matter is 4K is now absolutely viable at a locked 60 FPS on an RTX 4080, though your GPU will determine how high you can push the resolution there. This bonfire in central Yharnam with dozens of enemies is a great stress test, and it just flies by at 4K 60 FPS. The game's physics engine is in test, and it just flies.
Oh my god, deci are 60 FPS locked. Și doar 58% din placa video. Hai 60. Cool, deci mai are încă loc de 40%, nice. Cât o mai fi și 40% din 60. Nice.
Flies by at 4K 60 FPS. The game's physics engine is in place for cloth and object destruction across the world. Textures, lighting, enemy AI are all true to the PS4 version as well.
Ok, deci fix asta eram interesat, dacă sistemele originale sunt în funcțiune. Și omul spune precis, ia.
60 FPS. The game's physics engine
Ok, game's physics engine
is in place for cloth and
pentru cloth and
object destruction
distrugerea așa, ok, cool.
across the world. Textures, lighting, enemy
Texturi, iluminare, enemy AI, totul e neatins. Slavă cerului. De ce versiunea originală? Cool.
AI are all true to the PS4 version as well. Plus, of course, we have those improved geometry LODs to minimize pop-in. Great stuff. There is some good and bad news, however. Bad news first, that 60 FPS line is still punctuated by hitching at points in the world, usually while moving between areas for the very first time. Without Shad PS4 shader cache feature enabled, you'll see hitching as you first turn into new segments of the map, strike an enemy, or use a blood vial, resulting in a sizable 120 millisecond plus frame time spike. Again, we are getting 60 FPS 99% of the time, so these hiccups are really the outliers, but they do stick out. Now, the good news is that enabling Shad PS4's new shader caching feature at least fixes those hitches after the first encounter. Toggling the mode on in the experimental tab, you'll notice over time a cache folder starts to populate in the Shad PS4 directory for every shader compiled. Ultimately, this does mean that your first-time experience of each area will be your worst, as that file amasses more data. Still though, in side-by-sides, it's definitely a step forward over what we had before, and hitches will gradually decrease with more time on the clock. Hitches aside, the V-Synced experience is shaping up very well then, but what about going above 60 FPS? First, it's worth pointing out that the game is as much CPU bound as it is a GPU hog, and even in the case of my i9
90 Fps s-a dus peste 90% Nvidia RTX
13900 CPU, multiple threads are near maxing out at points. This alternate overlay shows how heavily Shad PS4's emulation hits select threads. Even so, and even at 4K resolution, the system is comfortably pulling in numbers in the 70 to 120 FPS range, which bodes well. All of which presents a unique problem for the emulator right now, because unfortunately, there's an issue running Bloodborne at around 110 FPS and higher.
Probleme la 110 FPS și mai mult?
It's a bug that causes any use of the sprint button to result in slow sliding movement. Regular walking speeds are fine, but something about the animation logic
Ok, deci logica animației la peste 110 frame-uri pe secundă când alergi E distrusă, am înțeles.
While sprinting is just incompatible with higher frame rates. So for now, the ability to run at high frame rates, even at 4K, is something of a mixed blessing. Assuming there is a way to fix the animation speed though, this could be an incredible way to play Bloodborne. To go one step further, running at 1440p or 1080p only further increases that frame rate. Again, that sprinting bug means I'll only be walking through each area to keep the movement in sync, since so much of the 1080p and 1440p gameplay runs in the triple figures. All of this is purely theoretical then, but it's fascinating to see just how high those numbers go for a PS4 emulator. It's actually tricky to decide on the exact ranges for our graph here, since cutscenes and smaller areas will easily run at 200 or even 300 FPS while at 1080p. The RTX 4080 is complete overkill for the task in these moments. Still, the most critical test is that central Yharnam area, where performance cascades down as you'd expect with each resolution bump, though again 1080p is still often well above 100 FPS even in this worst case. So while each playthrough does have traversal hitches in the very same spots, it points to a future where Bloodborne could in theory be played at absurdly high frame rates, if it can be optimized properly, something to watch out for perhaps in a future build. With some impressive results running the latest Shad PS4.
Ok, asta nu mă interesează. Xbox Ally, ia să vedem ce zice de Shadows of the Hunt mod.
Last of all then, let's switch back to desktop PC
Yeah, what the fuck? Oribil.
to check out the mod scene for Bloodborne as it stands in 2026. There's a real luxury of choice here, but the big highlight for me is this one by modder from SoftServe called Shadows of the Hunt. It's available on Nexus Mods as a large 15GB download, and once installed by simply copy-pasting the contents to the game's directory, it makes some genuinely impressive changes. I covered it last year under its older name, Bloodborne Remaster Project, and you can hear all the details directly in FromSoftServe's own excellent YouTube video. A year on, and after a title change, the big highlight really is the fully dynamic shadow casting, which replaces the baked shadow system.
Da, ok, sunt de acord. Umbrele, ca de exemplu aici... What? Stai. Aici umbra vine pe ăsta până aici și aici e total altfel. Aici e ăsta și până aici. Ok, nu mă îndoiesc că asta e varianta mai corectă, dar tot mi se pare like, grețos verdele ăsta. Nu mersi. Eu tot ce am vrut vreodată de la Bloodborne e atât. Update la 60 FPS, cel puțin sau maximum, locked, adică și 4K rezoluție dacă se poate. Nu vreau altceva. E un joc din 2015, arată absolut senzațional pentru ce era atunci și în 2026 chiar și probabil forever. Și atât.
System used in the original game. It means your character and the environment cast shadows from.
Da, și totul e mai colorat, dă un aspect mai de World of Warcraft, de comic book-ish. Vezi, aici sunt mult mai șterse, mai întunecate, mai în plan secundar și aici e au foarte mult pop. Nu-mi place strălucirea asta. Și la ușă.
System used in the original game.
Uite, e cartoonish. Aici e mai lemn, e mai închis, e mai puțin... Nu că puțin, e stilul artistic original, care e mai gothic. Asta e mult prea luminată. Mult prea stridentă, pardon.
Your character and the environment cast.
Nu-mi place. Aici se vede și mai mult detaliu, doar opinia mea, se vede și mai mult detaliu la mini-pelerina lui, pe când aici e doar un blob negru.
Și... in a more logical way.
Nu-mi place.
So, for example, your character
Iar aici se văd mai multe detalii pe asta, mai vezi ceva, dar aici...
can now appear half within a shadow and half out. Also, all elements of the...
E prea saturat, asta e ideea. Cred că a dat și contrastul mai mare și saturația mai mare, ceea ce nu mă... No.
The world will cast shadows properly, hence extra tree shadows spread across the back of central Yharnam
umbre, whatever.
And finally, extra point lights are added to the scene, meaning your character will cast a shadow where previously there was none. The snag is that the mod, right now, introduces some flickering shadows on buildings and trees, but it's still very impressive work and truly dynamic shadow casting from...
Chiar văzusem la cineva, un streamer, că a pus... Cred că vorbea despre asta, dar spunea, nu vă recomand modul pentru că strică tot jocul, eu n-am putut cu el. Deci, whatever. Whatever, fiecare face ce vrea.
The environment is something I'd love to see in an official Bloodborne remaster.
Uite, a dispărut și lumina asta. Bă, dar ce mișto se văd texturile. E lumina asta, nu știu cum să-i spun, semi-twilight, opaco-turcoaz, foarte fain, e mai creepy, e mai, uite, din partea asta vine aici, totul e... Și a eliminat, văd, nu știu cum să-i spun neapărat, un pic de ceață plus bloom, plus... E mult mai clar ce-i drept, dar din nou, parcă ia din... Nu neapărat din mister, dar ia din creepiness-ul ăla original. Nu me gusta.
On top of shadows, the game's materials are also adjusted via the mod. Parallax occlusion maps are tweaked, adding a greater sense of height and depth to the cobblestones across the pathways of the hunter's dream. In some cases, the original developer, From Software, had POM prepared for a surface.
Aici e fain la texturi. Asta da, aș vrea transplant de sharpness la texturi. Și aici la fel, uitați, aici super sharp, mișto, când aici mai puțin. Oricum, astea sunt like, super minore, n-au nicio treabă. Place mai mult ceața de aici, de exemplu, aici nu prea.
As a variable, but it went unused in the final game, and the mod reintroduces that effect on PC. Elsewhere, surface PBR values are adjusted to allow for a less wet and slimy look to some materials. Hence, the streets of Yharnam have less of a dewy wet sheen with the mod, while other objects emphasize the effect to give them more of a reflective appearance. The guiding logic, it seems, is to bring the visuals more in line with how material reaction works in newer Souls titles, like Dark Souls 3 onwards. Layering over these changes, the author also provides a reshade profile, which injects other effects into the game. All of the parameters can be adjusted within this overlay. First up, the game's poor default FXAA method is disabled, and in its place, reshade adds a more effective, temporal anti-aliasing pass that treats shimmer and noise in motion more capably. Color grading is tweaked by the Area 2, and finally, in a similar vein to the TAA, the game's default screen space ambient occlusion setting is disabled and replaced with MXAO via reshade. This ultimately removes the flickering under foliage seen in the PS4 original, and in its place, MXAO adds a thicker, more stable indirect shading pass to the world. Again, if it's not to your taste, all of these are tweakable in the reshade menu, but the result makes for a stark change that often works in its favor, I think.
Cineva nu e un Bloodborne fan adevărat.
With so many extras fixed in place, there is of course an
Bă, dar cum se mișcă, god damn.
inevitable performance cost. First up, I will say that the mod does introduce some bugs, like flickering shadows, especially in cutscenes, which I haven't been able to fix just yet. In terms of the frame rate metrics, running the mod also clearly has an impact over the vanilla experience. Yes, there was some headroom to work with before the mod, but the reality is that we're now in the 45 to 65 FPS range at 4K. There's no unlocked frame rate graph here in this case, as some of the reshade effects don't play ball with the FCAT border which we use, but the MSI diagnostics at top right should tell the whole story here. In short, my i9-13900 CPU and RTX 4080 setup isn't up to the challenge of locking at 60 FPS consistently here, and V-syncing this will reveal drops under. So, ultimately, the only course of action is to drop to 1440p, which immediately helps boost the frame rate to a more acceptable level. Even then, locking at 60 FPS isn't a total guarantee, and there are some blips under with the
Ok, deci îți rupe și performanța. Bun mod!
mod in tow. So, the takeaway is that pushing Bloodborne in this direction demands a serious desktop PC.
Okay,
Earlier on, from our original video testing the Shad PS4 emulator, the ongoing optimization efforts for Bloodborne have paid off handsomely. Assuming you just want the classic Bloodborne experience at 4K 60 or 1440p 60, this is now infinitely more viable, especially so with the shader cache option merged into recent builds. A pre-compilation shader pass would be better, of course, but once those shaders start populating the cache folder, the game runs fluidly for hours at a time. Once the emulator's all set up, it's actually easy to forget that it's running an emulation at all, outside of some occasional hitches. It's impressive progress, while the Shadows of the Hunt mod takes the whole project in an adventurous direction with visual tweaks that better fit the idea of a remaster. Above all though, the emulator's biggest achievement here today is that it runs on a handheld like the ROG Xbox Ally X. The fact we're playing a PS4 emulator on a 25-watt system while in a portable state, and doubling the game's original frame rate no less, is a great sign for its scalability. It's evidence that Bloodborne emulation will work for most PC setups in between, power spec-wise, and so, if you've the means or inclination.
Da, de fapt, într-adevăr, vestea bună de la faptul că merge pe ROG Xbox LAX e că cu un medium PC build n-ai avea nici tu probleme să-l rulezi la, nu știu, presupun cu 1080p.
It's seriously worth checking out. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free.
Da, cam asta a fost, ladies and gents. Vă rog, lăsați părerile în comentarii, civilizat dacă se poate, dați un like și mai ales cu hype, că ajută și porcăria aia. Aparent, doamne, ce urăsc YouTube. Numai bine vă urez, noi ne revedem când ne revedem.